Right. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We have a great workshop for you this afternoon, technical interview workshop, and some time to actually practice with mock interviews. We have Dr. Michael Koblenz here today to present and share his experience, and I'll turn it over to him so he can tell you a little bit about himself and get started. Thanks for being here.
Great, thanks. So welcome everybody. Before I get started, I'll mention that I have found it helpful in the past if I can actually see some of the people I'm talking to. So I'm not going to demand that anybody in particular show me video, but if I can get some sense that I'm not like lecturing into the void, that's helpful for me to have an experience that's like a little bit more personal. So thank you. Okay, great. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from. I just finished my PhD in computer science at CMU. I spent 8 years as a software engineer at Apple. And so that's primarily where I'm going to be drawing my recommendations for you today. So I interviewed over 150 different candidates for jobs when I was at Apple. But I want to emphasize that I'm going to give you, just one opinion, right? So I had my particular experience, and I'll tell you what I think you should do to prepare for a job interview and how to do well in a job interview. But there are lots of other different people who may have different opinions, and you should listen to them too. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what your interviewer might be thinking when they're interviewing you for a position. I'm going to give you some advice on how you might prepare for an interview, both screening interviews, which are maybe before an extended interview. They might be like a brief phone call, and then what I'm calling the on-site interview, although maybe these days they're not actually on-site either. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavioral and technical interview questions and how they're similar to each other, but maybe a little bit different. So I also want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to jump on the chat and let me know kind of what your thoughts are. I'll try to insert a few moments when we can have some group discussion. Part of today should be you asking me about sort of things that you're concerned about in the interview process, because I know a lot of people kind of have similar concerns, so it's useful if we can talk about those. I suppose if you wanted to ask anything anonymously, maybe Rachel could sort of provide an anonymization service if anybody wants to ask something that might be pertinent to other people, but you don't want to be identified. Okay, so if I'm recruiting people for a position, who do I want to hire? I want to hire somebody who I want to work with, somebody who will get the job done right and get it done right on time, someone who will figure it out on their own up to a point, somebody who will work with a team, not somebody who's going to disappear into a cave and work all alone. Somebody who's going to bring new insights and new knowledge to the team. So not just a clone of me or somebody else who already exists on the team, and not a clone of the person who just left whose position I'm trying to fill, but somebody who addresses the particular needs that I have right now in terms of what I'm trying to get done on the team. And it's a bonus if you have done something similar before, right? So usually you can't hire somebody who has the exact same kind of experience that pertains exactly to this position. So I'll talk in a little bit about how you should read job descriptions, and particularly kind of with a grain of salt. This process is a very risk-averse process, and that can be a big challenge for you, because if the outcome of the interview is, well, so-and-so might be pretty good, but I'm not sure, that turns into a don't hire. And on one hand, the candidate can feel like, what did I do wrong? When the answer is, well, there's nothing specific that they did wrong. On the other hand, you should keep in mind that, maybe it's not two hands, but you should keep in mind that for this reason, when there isn't a perfect match, you should expect to do a bunch of interviews, right? So, when I interviewed people for positions, it might take, 5 or 10 interviews to eventually extend an offer. And this was for, people who we had already decided were, reasonably good candidates, good enough that we wanted to talk to them in person. So, if you do a few interviews and you don't get an offer yet, you shouldn't feel dejected or like you're not competent or something, right? It's just part of the process. It may take a bunch of tries to get one offer, and that's just how it goes. Right. The part of this is that people are very risk averse, right? So if you hire someone who is not very good, it can take a really long time to get rid of them. And they can do actually very expensive damage. Whereas if you don't hire someone who might be good, well, someone who is probably going to come along in a little bit. So just sort of keep that perspective in mind. If you get answers that you don't like, right, just remember that, you just need to keep interviewing and you'll get an offer eventually. Okay, good. So I'm seeing a little lag here now, I don't know why. Right, so what I need to answer as the interviewer is, what can this candidate do and how much help will I need in doing that kind of work, right? And typically the answer to this question is not, they don't need any help, they're going to do it all alone, right? There are going to be areas of strength and areas of weakness for every candidate. And the job of the interviewer is to try to figure out which are the areas of strength and which are the areas of weakness. And can we provide some training in the areas of weakness so that we can take advantage of the strengths? So how should you prepare for a job interview? Well, first I want to start with a resume, right? Because although the primary purpose of a resume is to get you the interview, the secondary purpose is really to introduce you to your interviewer, right? And you will get interviews for the person who your resume says you are. So if your resume portrays you as a student, well, nobody really wants to hire like a generic student, right? They want to hire somebody with particular skills who's going to apply them for a particular purpose. Now, everything on your resume is fair game. And having read hundreds and hundreds of resumes, I can get to know people really quickly, like in 30 seconds by reading a resume. And I say 30 seconds because what I've done in the past is I'll get a stack of resumes this thick and I'll need to pick out a few people who I want to talk to, right? And so, there might be 100 or 200 or however many people in there. So, most people, it's like, well, they want a job, but not the one that I have, right? So you're like looking for people who might be interested in the job that you have. And then, okay, once you find one of those, okay, what kind of experience do they have? What skills do they have? Is this somebody I want to talk to? And I will find your typos. I don't know how I find your typos, but I will find your typos. So please have somebody else who is not yourself proofread your resume. It's really hard to find your own typos. It's just somehow a fact of life. Also, if you're not a native language speaker, ask a native language speaker to read your resume. Preparing resumes is not a job skill, by which I mean you're not being evaluated on your ability to prepare a resume. It is not cheating to ask somebody to help you, work out the text of how you're describing your experience. One thing you can do is you take your resume draft and you hand it to somebody, maybe a friend, and you ask them to explain to you what you did, who you are, and why what you did was hard. And your friend should be able to do this. If what they say is, I see you worked on the ABC project, but I'm not familiar with ABC, so I don't really know what you did, right? Then you need to refine your resume to explain what ABC is and explain why ABC was compelling. You can't assume that acronyms that you are familiar with are ones that your resume reader is familiar with, so explain things. Okay, so to prepare for the actual interview, you should be able to answer the following questions. Do you have any questions? The only correct answer to this question, by the way, is yes. You can't say no, I don't have any questions, because if you say no, I don't have any questions, it portrays like, I wasn't really interested enough in this job to think about questions in advance. Or yeah, so just have questions in advance. You should be able to answer the question, why do you want to work here? And what product or project do you want to work on? And this is really important because your interviewer is trying to match you with a project or a team. And if what you say is, I want to do interesting things, and your interviewer's got like a list of different projects and they're trying to match you with a project, well, that's not really very helpful, right? You want some sort of concrete information, like, oh, I really want to work with distributed databases. Oh, okay, I've got a distributed database project, or I don't have a distributed database project, or I'm interested in doing any of the following three things: this area, that area, the other area. But if you just say, I'm flexible, you're not giving your interviewer much to work with. And what kind of work do you want to do, right? Give something concrete. I had a lot of people sort of give me like a fishing answer. Well, especially if there's like a career fair kind of context, and you can go up to a recruiter at a career fair, and you go up to them, hi, I'm so-and-so, and they say, okay, what do you want to do here? And you say, well, you're a, oh, I see your sign. Okay, you're a software company. I like algorithms. What do you have in the area of algorithms? Well, it's not only is it not concrete enough to really match you with a position, but it's clear that you haven't like looked up the company in advance. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time, right? You can like walk around once, maybe now it's virtual, but like look at the list of companies, look each one up, look at the job positions that are open, and try to figure out, which of these things could I see myself doing? And then when you go up to them, you can say, oh, I'm interested in this position. Can you tell me more about it? And then you can have a more interesting conversation than just like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I want a job.
Someone sent
Okay,
me a
so,
question.
oh yeah,
Mind if I
good.
jump in from it?
Yeah, sure.
Someone asked, because you were talking about having questions prepared for an interview. If you've already asked a question and the person asks if you have any more questions, what's an appropriate answer in this situation? Or maybe even they didn't ask this, but I'll ask you, like, how many questions should you have prepared?
Oh yeah. I mean, you don't have to, you know, always have more questions, right? If you've asked a couple of questions and you had a meaningful conversation about them, then you know that's good enough. You don't. It's not like Jeopardy where you need to like always have more questions available. It's just usually the format is your interviewer will ask you a lot of questions, and then at the very end they say, okay, so do you have any questions? And it's at that point that you need to have like 1 or 2 questions prepared. And you know, ideally they would be questions that are related to that particular person. You know, so at the beginning they say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work on X. Now I have some questions for you. And then they ask you something about, you know, can you write this code on the board or whatever. And at the end you said, oh, I see you work on X. Can you tell me about what it's like to work on X? Right? Or do you use the following approach when you encounter problems in X? Or what are the main problems you see in your area? Or you can ask that of almost anybody. And it gets you some sort of deeper conversation about what they do. People love to talk about what they do. And it shows that you are interested in their particular area.
As a follow-up, are there any questions you should not ask?
Any questions you should not ask? Yeah, I would leave anything about money to later. Sort of money and benefits. You know, is there a good company gym? You know, all that stuff you can deal with sort of the negotiation process if they give you an offer.
The other one that I usually tell is if it's something really basic, like don't ask a basic question that you could find on their website, because that shows that you didn't do your homework and didn't do any research. Yep. Great, thanks.
That's good. Sure. Okay, so I want to look at a standard job description. .com Inc. is looking for a fantastic web developer, must have 5 years of experience in JavaScript, C++, and pony wrestling. The ideal candidate is great with Unicode and casts a rainbow aura. And I put this here because I think this actually does reflect some real job descriptions. Or because if you think about the process by which a job description is written, well, there's actually a lot of different processes, but you're talking to a particular interviewer, right? And that interviewer probably didn't write the job description. The job description may be from 2 years ago, dating from some previous project. And so some of the things are not even relevant, and they don't care whether you're any good at Unicode because that was last year's project. No, it's this year. And actually, they disagree that, you know, we should be using JavaScript at all, right? So when you look for positions and you consider applying to positions, you should take the whole job description with a grain of salt. Right, so if you're looking at this thing and you've got like 3 years of experience in C++ and you've never used JavaScript, but you Googled Unicode and you kind of looks like it makes sense to you, like this is a position where you might want to apply, even though you don't really quite match the job description. There's data about gender bias in here, by the way. It turns out that women are less likely to apply for a job for which they are, at least on paper, underqualified than men. And so my advice to everybody is if it looks like an interesting job to you and you are remotely qualified for it, then you should apply, even if you don't check all of the boxes. Right? There's like a whole procedure to writing a job description that varies by company, and there may be a lot of disagreement and it may be old, so don't take it too seriously. Okay, so a screening interview. The question an interviewer is trying to answer in a screening interview is whether it's worth spending a day talking to this candidate. So they want to know, okay, what does the candidate want? And do I have a job that's kind of like that? And if the answer is no, then they have saved you a bunch of hassle by telling you, I'm sorry, we don't have a position for you, right? Because you don't want to spend a whole day of your life interviewing with a company about a job that you don't want. So, you know, it's fine if the answer at the end of the discussion is, you know, I see you want to do this and we only have that. So, you know, let's keep in touch. And then next is the skill set in the right ballpark. So usually the technical questions in this sort of screening interview are a little bit easier because they just want to know, like, are you in the right ballpark, right? Because if you think about, imagine you're given an exam in a class, and if the exam only has one question on it, right, and you do poorly in the exam, Well, it doesn't really mean very much, right? Because they just happen to miss, all the areas that you do know about in that one exam question, right? That's why exams typically have many questions. So the screening interview, maybe they only get to ask 1 or 2 questions that are technical. And so they're going to make them easier probably than a more in-depth one that you'll have in a more extended interview. So that's what I kind of mean by right ballpark, right? And sometimes they have a list of possibilities, like I want to know if they know about A, B, or C. And so they have a question for A. And you say, I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with A. And then they say, okay, how about B? And then oh yeah, I know about B, right? So, they may have 3 different positions open. And, all you need to know is, one of them. And the fact that you didn't know about A doesn't mean that you should panic and feel like, you weren't qualified for the job. So, just keep that in mind as you're going through these things. So that's why I say there's no need to ace this or any other interview. They'll give you lots of different opportunities to show your skills, or at least they will if they're a good interviewer. And if you miss one, well, that's okay, typically. All right, now I want to talk about the full interview. This used to be called an on-site interview. Maybe it will be again. But by full interview, I mean probably a sequence of different people who you're going to talk to, probably not just one. At least that's typical for a full-time position. For an internship, it may be a substantially shorter interview process. But you might be talking to 5, 6, 7 different people and basically 5 or 7 different interviews. So the first step that you should take is to get to know your interviewer. You should be careful to avoid assumptions. One of the awkward things about an interview is that they and you get to ask more personal questions than you would normally ask somebody when you're just meeting them, right? So, just like they can ask you, tell me why you left your last position, right? Which is kind of deeply personal in some cases, right? You can also ask them, like, tell me where you see yourself in 5 years, right? Or what is your role here? And those are fair questions in the context of a job interview because you're trying to find out what it's like to be at this company. Every interview is really 2 interviews, right? They're interviewing you, but you are also interviewing them. Right? This is your opportunity to find out if this position is a good fit for you. So you should ask people questions and avoid making assumptions. I had a friend, she was actually the first interviewer for a candidate that day. And sometimes, in some companies, the practice is the first interviewer is an HR person. And some organizations, the practice is the first interviewer is whoever just happened to be scheduled first, right? Some engineer, or whatever position you're kind of looking for. And it became clear to my friend that the candidate assumed that she was an HR person. And so what she was thinking was, are you assuming this because I'm a woman? Right? And she didn't ask that, of course. But my point is, don't make assumptions about job roles, because what you can do is just ask them, what is your role here? What do you do here? That's a perfectly fair and reasonable question to ask your interviewer. And you should just ask rather than making any kind of assumptions. You can ask them, what do you do here and how long have you been here? What do you like best about your job? What's a tough day like? What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? If you don't have any questions, ask them at the end. When they ask you if you have questions, you can ask one of these questions. Don't ask them what their name is, though. You should know that already. You can take notes, by the way. Some interviewees come with a little notebook. And if you just write down their name at the beginning of the interview, then you can send a thank you email afterward, acknowledging people by name. Bad practice to somebody asks about upward mobility. Yeah, no, that's great. Ask, where do people who accept this kind of position tend to go? Where do they end up in 5 years or whatever kind of time period you're interested in? You're trying to figure out, is this kind of a dead end job? Is this a position where people, is it a miserable position and people immediately jump into some other kind of position that's less stressful? Is it great and people end up here for, well, you have to decide for yourself how long you want to be in the position, right? It's sort of a match between your expectations and what the job is. Okay, so every question I want you to view as an opportunity for you to show who you are and what you know and what you can do. So for example, if they say, tell me about this project. And when I say this project, what I mean is they're looking at your resume and they're pointing at something, this project right here. So when you answer this kind of question, you should tell them about what you personally did. So if you just say, oh yeah, in that project, we did this and we did that, and the group did this other thing, that doesn't tell them what your particular role was. And what they want to know is what you did. So, you can introduce the project generally. Oh, I was on a team and together we built this thing. My particular role was to, and then say what you did. Interviewers are testing you against your resume. In other words, they invited you for an interview because if you are the person who your resume, or if you are the person who they think you are based on reading the resume, then you're a good candidate for the job, right? But they want to know, like when you say you know C++, what does that really mean? I know as I progressed from like high school to college and later, I ended up removing things from my resume because things that I thought I knew, I realized I didn't know well enough to really want to be asked questions about in interviews. So if you write on your resume that you know C++, you should be able to explain what happens if you have a non-virtual destructor. And if you can't answer that question, it's perfectly fine as long as C++ was not very high in your list of languages that you are advertising, right? So it's all about match. So, they may be thinking, well, C++ is like fourth on the list of languages, and I've got the C++ project. So how quickly can they come up to speed? And if the answer is, well, you'll be able to come up to speed, but there's some study that you'll have to do, that's a perfectly fine outcome, and you can still maybe get the job. They're just trying to figure out, along all of these dimensions, where are you? Tell me about a time you had trouble in your team and fixed a hard bug on project X, right? So if you say, I've never had trouble in my team, or I don't, my code is great. I don't have hard bugs in my code, right? Then they know you've never worked on a team and never written a substantial piece of software, right? So you should be able to have some sort of story about how you resolved some kind of team problem, or when you fixed some sort of hard bug. And they're not looking for just, did you fix a hard bug, but can you tell me the story and take me there so I can see what steps you took to fix the bug? Do you have debugging skills that you'll be able to apply? Do you have a bunch of techniques in your toolbox that you can use? That kind of thing. Okay. Someone is asking how to address people in thank you emails. Usually in tech companies, everybody goes by their first name. If somebody introduces himself in some other way, then I guess you could do it some other way, but that by and large, that's the convention. Somebody asked, what do you do if your interviewer repeats the question? Can you tell me more about that question? Maybe you can clarify in the chat and we can come back to it. Somebody asks about a tier list for programming languages. You can, it's really hard to provide really granular information about what you know in programming languages. So most people just have an ordered list. And by ordered list, I mean it's a list, and so it's in an order, and everybody assumes that your most proficient language is the first one. So that's probably good enough. You can break it down if you wanna do that. Okay, I want to talk about negative questions. Like this one. Why did you leave your last job or internship? Is someone brave enough to propose an answer to this question? It doesn't need to be like deeply personal. It could be some story that is that will provide us some discussion. I can offer some general feedback if anybody's willing to share a story.
Yeah. I will allow them to unmute, and then hopefully you'll have a response.
Good, thanks.
All right, now we should have people unmuting, ready to share.
Okay, good.
Hello, can you hear me right?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tripti, and the answer to this question probably would be, I'm looking to explore a new area altogether, and I have been working in XYZ, but I want to extend my scope of knowledge. Would that be a answer?
Yep, that's great. Perfect. It's even better, if you can be more specific. You don't have to do that in this context, but in the last job I focused on area X. Now I'm really interested in exploring area Y, and I see you have a focus on area Y. Anybody else?
Thank you.
What if the answer like is a more personal answer, like something you might not want to tell the interviewer, like, oh, I didn't get along with my boss or whatever.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going with this question. And that makes this kind of question really challenging when that's the answer, or when there's an answer where, and so the my message for you here is that basically there are two sides to every story, and your interviewer knows they're only getting one side, right? So if you only say, like, I didn't get along with my manager, then your interviewer is wondering, well, are you going to get along with this manager? Right? So if you can be more specific about what changes you want to see, or like, if you just say I didn't get along with my manager, that's not really specific enough to explain the problem. Like, you don't want to look like every time you don't like somebody, you change jobs. Probably what's going on is there's something more specific, like, your manager, you really wanted to do design work, and your manager had a lot of test work, and your manager kept assigning you test work, and you kept telling your manager, look, thanks, but I really want design work, and you keep giving me test work. Can I really move into design? And your manager keeps saying, well, no, sorry, we don't, right? So like, then it's not a personal issue with your manager. It's, your manager maybe did the best they could, but that context, wasn't the right one for you because the work didn't line up with the kind of work that you're trying to target. Yeah, okay. Another example, how did your last big group project go? And maybe it was a disaster. So does someone have a suggestion for an answer you could give? Let's say your last group project was a disaster and you did all the work. Other people did not do any reasonable amount of work, and you were stuck doing the whole thing all by yourself. You had to like make up for all of the deficiencies in all of your teammates, and you had a really terrible time. What do you say?
I can take a stab at it.
Sure.
So I think one response that I think I would personally come up with would be saying, I want to be on a team where I have the opportunity to learn from other people. And and be on a team where I'm going to be challenged to where I'm going to have the opportunity to learn from them and be challenged to improve.
It sounds like it was already challenging though, right? I mean,
yes.
The challenge was you had all the work, that you did it all by yourself. Wasn't that challenging?
Yeah, I mean, this particular part is I wanted to emphasize that I want to be able to get something from my team. Is that at least what I was trying to get at?
Okay. If you were an interviewer, what might a skeptical interviewer think?
What are the specifics from that answer?
I guess what I'm getting at is, the interviewer might think, you sort of look down on your coworkers, like you're looking for better coworkers, and so my suggestion with this kind of question is to try to put others in an optimistic light, even if you hate their guts. So, is there a rephrasing of that answer that puts other people in a positive light, even though you hate their guts? It's okay to hate them. I mean, not really hate them, but right, it's okay to have been disappointed with their performance on this project. Like, that's fine. But if you just say to your interviewer, the other people couldn't do the work, then they might think, well, you're going to come here and think we can't do the work either. Maybe they'll think, well, this is somebody who wants to like work all alone, not with a team. How do you come across in a positive teamwork way?
I would say you can use this opportunity to kind of highlight some of your leadership skills and say, you know, it was a team effort. I definitely stepped into a leadership role. It taught me X, Y, Z. I learned this, that, and whatever. Maybe something like that.
Okay, good. So you did something to address the situation. And here's what you did. And maybe you even learned something from it. Okay, yeah, I like that. One thing, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people don't perform at a level you were hoping, right? Like one possibility is they didn't have relevant experience. One possibility is they didn't have the time to devote to the project, right? Either because, you know, their manager didn't allocate enough time for them to work on it, or they mismanaged their time and they didn't spend enough time on it, whatever it was. Or everything was right, but this project was low on their list of priorities and they just had a lot of other things that they were working on. And so these things are things that you can mention without being judgmental, right? So like if you say something like, you know, other people had other priorities, or you know, other people had scheduling conflicts, or other people had, you know, this project was not a major priority for some of the other teammates, and as a result, and that you know, people didn't communicate this in advance, and so as a result, you know, toward the end of the project, people didn't fulfill their commitments because they, you know, they didn't communicate, you know, the amount of time that they had available for this project, right? So, for example, instead of saying, I worked with some really dumb people, you can't say that. You might instead say, I was the only one there who was expert at such and such, right? This project really required expertise in this area. I was the only one there who had that expertise. So that's why. Okay. So, you know, I'm not suggesting that you make excuses for other people. I'm just suggesting that you portray people in a non-judgmental way, so that you can sort of be a little bit disconnected from their performance, right? So like if they say they were all slackers, you can instead say, well, we had different levels of commitment to the project, right? So when somebody doesn't spend time on the project, well, it's about commitment and time allocation, right? It's not because they're a bad person, I hope. At least I won't make that assumption. Okay, Matthew asks, should answers always try to incorporate technical experience? Not all experience is technical. Some experience is very relevant, but isn't technical, like teamwork, leadership, that sort of thing. And so no, if the answer is about teamwork or leadership or I'll say self-discipline or like sort of personal skills, it's perfectly fine. You don't have to make things technical if they're not technical. You could say, you know, in this project, the reason the project didn't work well was that the person who was supposed to be the project manager had never managed a project before. And they didn't know that you should have a schedule with deadlines. And, you know, I kind of stayed out of it because they were the project manager and it wasn't really my job, but it meant that we didn't have a schedule with deadlines. And so when it came time to integrate things at the end, things weren't ready. And so now I learned it's very important to have a schedule with, you know, intermediate deadlines so that you stay on track with your projects. Okay, tough questions like, tell me about a time you made a bad decision, or tell me a mistake you made, or tell me about a time you were on a team and you have a hard time working with someone, or tell me about a hard bug you fixed. Does anyone want to give suggestions on how to handle these kinds of questions? Maybe you've answered these questions before in some of your interviews that you've already had.
Well, I would say to go on your advice and giving it a positive spin. Like, of course, since they're tough questions because they're kind of like reflects kind of like a negative aspect of you. Like, tell me about a mistake. It could be a big or small one, but I think what the question is asking for this is, what did you do to fix this mistake, and what did you learn from it, or something? So I think that's the most important part about answering this question.
Yeah, I really like your idea of emphasizing what you learned. Because the point is, if they hire you, they will have hired someone who has already learned this lesson. They don't need to teach you this lesson, while you're on the job there. Other suggestions? One piece of advice I give is to try to choose an area that is not sort of one of your core competencies, right? So, if you say, well, I designed the architecture and I did it badly and it was a disaster, right? Well, you really need to do a good job at that. But if it's like, well, I was working on the French localization for such and such, and I don't speak French, but I did some looking into like what you need to do to make this thing work in French, and I did the best I could, and we shipped it, and then we got all these complaints from French speakers. And what I learned from this is, if you want to localize it to French, you really need someone who actually knows French to do the work. Right, so you're not trying to sell yourself as a French localization expert. You're maybe a software engineer, and in particular, you're a software engineer who now knows that you need domain expertise in order to do a good language for internationalization. Other comments? Okay. So sometimes you're in an interview and you feel like it's going poorly. You feel like you didn't give a good answer to the question you were just asked. And now you're worried that, you're not going to get the job, and you're maybe like getting a little bit panicky because like this is a high stakes kind of thing. And so I'll give you the following advice. It's really hard to judge your own performance. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I interviewed candidates, I asked a question that was intentionally fairly hard and open-ended. And if you were to look in a textbook, you could find the answer to my question. But the point was, most people hadn't recently read the textbook. And I wasn't asking the question to find out how recently people have read the textbook, right? I was asking the question to find out whether we could have a meaningful conversation about algorithms. And so if you went home and you looked up this problem, you would get an answer. And you might think to yourself, well, I didn't come up with that answer, so maybe I flunked the interview. But actually, almost nobody does. So it's fine. The point is not, can you recite for me the algorithm that you maybe learned about, maybe didn't, right? The question is, did we have an interesting conversation? And can you make some concrete progress toward a solution to this problem? So that's what I mean by it's hard to judge your own performance, right? Because a good interviewer, or at least an experienced interviewer, will have asked the same question to a bunch of candidates in the past. And so you don't know whether your answer that you came up with is like 90th percentile or 10th percentile. All you know is you did the best you could, right? And even if there's a much better answer, your answer might still be a 90th percentile answer. Not that people quantify things in this way, but your interviewer may be thinking, well, only 1 in 10 people gives an answer that's that good, so I'm going to hire them, or at least I'm going to argue for hiring them. Another thing is, every interviewer is a fresh start. Typically, usually the interviewers don't talk to each other in between the interviews. So, you go to your first interview and you're thinking this was a disaster, and then you go to your second interview and you're still thinking this whole thing is a disaster. But the second interview has no idea what just happened, right? So it's a fresh start for you. And like it's hard to like reset yourself. I was known for asking sort of hard questions. And so people who went after me, like interviewers who went after me, sometimes reported the candidate was like a little bit flustered. And I feel somewhat bad about that. And a lot of people who didn't do an awesome job at my question, still got the job, because that was one of a whole bunch of questions, and they did a perfectly reasonable answer. It just wasn't perfect. You can always ask for a break. Especially if you're virtual, right? Your interview doesn't know anything about your schedule or whatever. Last resort, you can ask for advice, right? If you're pretty sure that it didn't go well, you can ask them, what should I study in the future to understand more about this area? And it shows that you're interested. It shows that you care. It shows that you're interested in following up. You can say, that was an interesting problem. I'm wondering if there are better ways of going about it. And they may be happy to tell you a better solution to the problem. And if you can understand their answer and make some intelligent sounding comments, that's much better than if you didn't have the discussion and it sounds like you're satisfied with an answer that you know isn't quite great. Sometimes, by the way, there is no awesome answer, right? Like sometimes, okay, in school, a lot of the problems that you get have beautiful answers, and you're supposed to find the beautiful answer. In the real world, it isn't always like that. And sometimes the interview questions don't have like a beautiful gem that you're supposed to arrive at the end. So you can ask, you know, okay, that was neat. Are there better ways of thinking about this? And sometimes the answer is no, you did great. And then you can feel good about yourself. And also, one bad interview probably won't ruin you unless it was, let's say, unless you broke laws or something, right? Like, you know, if you just didn't know the answer to their question, but you had a reasonable conversation and you have 5 other interviews that went great, you know, they may discount that one. Just knocked over my microphone. Okay. Also, keep in mind, you know, everybody who interviews, you know, sometimes has to interview for their first time. So your interviewer may be a novice too. One time I asked a question, and you know, it didn't. No, the candidate didn't really give a good answer. And then I reported the meeting afterward. They didn't give a good answer. And then somebody asked me, well, what was the question you asked? And I told them the question. I said, well, that's a really hard question. I don't know that I would have a good answer to that either. And then my negative feedback kind of got not quite thrown away, but almost thrown away, because it's like, well, you know, if you wouldn't hire the people who were already on the team with this question, then maybe it wasn't a good question. So that's like sort of a novice interviewer mistake, but you could have a novice interviewer and not know it. You probably shouldn't ask your interviewer how many interviews they've done already. Okay, ask for what you need. Your third interviewer doesn't know whether you've had a bathroom break yet, even if you've had 2 already, one after each of the 2 previous ones. It's especially important that you ask for what you need if you have particular needs that can be accommodated. I had one interviewee who I think walking was a little bit hard for him, and we didn't know this in advance. He didn't tell us. And our practice had been, you know, for lunch, walk to the cafeteria and then walk back. And for most people, this is no problem. For him, it was a little bit of a problem. And if he had told us in advance, I mean, we could have brought food in, we could have done all kinds of things. But because we didn't know, it put sort of everybody in an awkward situation. So if you have anything like that, where they can accommodate your needs, you know, it's best if you tell them in advance. It's always less awkward if you can sort of arrange it in advance than if it comes up at the last minute. Let's see. Ask interviewer with a question similar to what I actually do on the job. Okay. A lot of questions are related to the work, and if you can identify the relationship yourself, that's even better. So you can almost speculate sometimes. Oh, you're interested in, you know, graph search. I see this is Facebook, so I guess you probably work with social networks a lot and graphs. And what kind of graph problems do you encounter a lot, right? You can't ask that question everywhere, but if you're thinking about Facebook, that might be a relevant question. So if you can do that alignment for them, it sort of shows them that you're thinking one level more deeply about the problem. I'll talk more about this in the technical question section. Does anybody have any questions about this section?
If you don't know the answer to something, like, should you say something other than just like, I don't know? Or
Yes.
wait, what should you say?
Yes. So, well, it depends on what kind of question it is. If it's like, you know, if it's a purely fact-based question, like, you know, please tell me the first digit of pi, like either you know it or you don't. And you can just say, I don't know. But most questions are not like that. Most questions are more slippery kind of. So they say, you know, can you please tell me the first 10 digits of pi? You don't say, I don't know. You say, here are the first 5 digits, right? So, you know, you give them part of an answer, and then you acknowledge that you're not giving them the entire answer. This sort of goes along the lines of everything you can say is to your credit. So if you can, and sometimes you need to ask them a question in order to understand the question, right? So like they might use an acronym in their question and you don't know what the acronym is. So it's much better, rather than saying, I don't know, to say, can you tell me about that acronym? I'm not familiar with that acronym. And then try again. Maybe now that you know the acronym, maybe now you can make some progress. You know, try to come up with something that is related, that shows them that you have some relevant experience, even if you're not exactly, you know, head on. There's a distinction between behavioral questions and technical questions. And the terminology goes like this. Behavioral questions ask you about something you have done in your past. Technical questions are hypothetical. So a lot of behavioral questions which are about your past are actually trying to get at technical information, right? So if they ask you, I see on your resume you designed such and such a thing, tell me about it. What they may want to know is, you know, how deeply do you understand this? What were the considerations? Did you think through the architecture? What have you learned about how to do this kind of thing? So they're looking for technical information about your skills, but it's a behavioral question that they're asking you about your real experience working with this tool that you worked with. Other comments about the section that we finished? We'll have more discussion later. Maybe I'll move on to technical questions. Oh, there's a question about what happens if you get a question you've seen before. One suggestion is tell them you already saw it for honesty points. I'm not sure that I would tell them I saw it before, because these are not. They're not like secret puzzles. It's more like, do you have this skill? And if the answer is yes, I have this skill, well, then you have the skill. It doesn't matter that you got the skill by being there. Actually, if you've got the skill by being there, then it's better. So, I mean, if it's an artificial puzzle, you know, like the one with the, you know, there's the wolf and the chicken and the farmer and the canoe, and you're supposed to carry across the river, and the fox will eat the chicken and the farmer has to supervise and paddle, like that one. If you get that one and you just saw that one, okay, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that one. Maybe you say what the answer is first and confirm that you have the right answer. But if it's like, please write me this code on the whiteboard for quicksort. And yeah, of course, you've seen quicksort before. You don't have to fess up to having seen quicksort, right? You'll just do the best you can in the implementation, and you'll probably make some mistakes because quicksort is hard. Nathan, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question about this topic of if you've seen a question before. For something along the lines of, let's say, interviewer gives you a question that's like that you've seen on LeetCode before, for example, wouldn't it be better than in that situation to let them know that you've seen it, just because in those types of situations, they're kind of looking at how you approach the problem, and there won't be much to take away from the interviewer if you can just, like, if you already know the solution, I guess, like, so they won't see your problem solving. Like, so what would you do in that situation?
You know, usually, okay, if you say I've already seen this, and then they say, great, show me anyway, and then you mess it up, that doesn't look good for you. And you've sort of lost the benefit of having seen it. So I guess I'll go with my answer from before. Like if there's a trick answer, like the one with the canoe and the farmer and the fox and that one, then you can say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that one, here's the answer. But if it just happens to be a similar problem to one you've seen before, I would just solve it for them. You know, you can acknowledge at the end, oh yeah, that's similar to something I've seen before. But you know, they'll know. You know, if you the question that I told you, I usually ask people, you know, you could look it up in a textbook, and some people had come having already read the textbook. And so when they just gave me the textbook solution, I didn't imagine that they had invented it from whole cloth right there, right? I knew they'd read the textbook, and that's fine. That's good. They're well read. It's part of the game. I don't know. Okay, some strategies for technical interviews, and then I want to give you some time to kind of try these things yourselves in pairs. First, make sure you understand the question. And ideally why it's relevant to the work. If you can make that connection, it shows that you're kind of thinking at a higher level. If you get, you know, your interviewer has allocated, you know, half an hour to discuss this question. If you spend 20 minutes answering the wrong question, you've lost 20 minutes, and now you're gonna have trouble catching up. So make sure you understand the question. Sometimes a good strategy is write the question down in a way that the interviewer can see it, just to make sure you're on the same page. This is particularly useful if you and the interviewer are not speaking in the same native language, just to make sure that everybody really understands, okay, here's the thing I'm working on right now. Understand what the interviewer wants. You know, do they want code? Do they want diagrams? Do they just want to talk about it? If they want diagrams and you give them code, then first of all, you're going to spend a lot of time writing the code, much more time than it would take to draw a diagram. And second, you offer an opportunity for yourself to make mistakes that are not relevant to the question that the interviewer was asking about, right? So maybe they don't want to know whether you can code in C++. What they want to know is, do you understand how, you know, this protocol works? And if you start writing the code and then you get stuck in some detail with like pointer arithmetic or whatever, not only are you not answering the question, but now you've shown them that you're not sure how to do pointers. So just focus on the question that they're asking in the format that they're looking for an answer. Most interview problems are not that hard. I mean, some are, but most are not that hard, right? Think about the difference between a test and a homework assignment. In a homework assignment, you've got a lot of time. You can think about things at your own pace. You can have hard questions. In an exam, there's not a lot of time. And so the questions are typically going to be a little bit easier, a little bit more well-defined. So most interview questions are like that. So if you feel like it's getting harder and harder, you know, think about whether you're taking the wrong approach. Now, everything you know and can figure out is to your benefit. So explain and write down everything you know. If you're asked a question and you stand there and you think, you're not getting any points for yourself because you're not showing what you know. So, you know, if your interviewer says, hey, what's a good data structure for such and such a thing? You can say, well, let's see, I could use a stack, but then it has the following consideration. So maybe I'll try a tree, but then it has this problem. So maybe I'm going to go with specifically a B tree because that minimizes seek times. So, okay, now your interviewer knows that you know about several different data structures. And when you said B tree, you didn't just sort of pick B tree because you always pick B tree, right? You actually thought about what your choices were going to be. Try a different approach if you get stuck. Like I said, most of these are not that hard. If you can solve a simpler problem that is not the one your interviewer asked, you can still get points that way, right? So you can make assumptions. Gosh, I don't know. You asked about if there are 10 million inputs. I don't know about 10 million inputs. Let's start with 10 inputs. Okay, if there are 10 inputs, I can solve that one. Okay, now let's think again about the 10 million. Let's see how we scale this. Avoid premature optimization. This one is a really important one, particularly for students, because you're accustomed to getting homework assignments where your instructor wants the optimal answer, right? Give me the optimal algorithm for doing such and such. And your interviewer may want you to go there, but in the real world, a lot of times something simple is better. So instead of designing a really complicated, clever thing that is ideal, first say, look, a simple way to do this is like this. We could just check all the cases. And I know it's slow, but if your input is only up to size 10, then it's perfectly acceptable. So now you tell me, you know, do you want me to go further and think about larger sizes, or is this what you're looking for, right? And then your interviewer, A, can give you points for coming up with something simple quickly, and B, you know, you can have that conversation. And if the interviewer actually wants something else, then you can go figure out what to do next. A lot of people get really stuck in the details of like something that is way harder than it needs to be because they were trying to optimize out something that doesn't really matter in the end. You can't really give up, right? This goes to somebody's question earlier. Can you say you don't know? You can't really say you don't know, period. You can say, I'm not sure about this part. Do you have a suggestion for how to get started? Or am I on the right track here? It seems like I'm not quite sure where to go from here, right? So like you get points for where you've gotten so far. You're going to get some points for where you will go next. And yeah, you missed out on a few points in the middle, but you didn't get stuck. You didn't give up. And you know, you can kind of salvage the situation for yourself. I have one former coworker who just kept making it harder and harder until people asked for help. And the people who asked for help, those are the ones who passed the interview because that's what he wanted to know. So, you know, I didn't do that myself because I thought it was a little bit unfair, but, you know, different people have their own things they're trying to find out.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
About premature optimization. What if the solution is what if the question isn't so difficult, whereas you can immediately kind of know like where the what kind of solution is going to be most optimal.
Yeah,
Um,
you know,
yeah,
yeah, if you
yeah,
know the optimal solution already, then that's fine. You know, you can
yeah.
provide.
I asked that because I mean, we had a so when you're doing like problems and like even learning from our algorithms course, we learn to identify like what kind of solutions are going to be uh, how fast the solution like can possibly be, you know, like sometimes I can say, hey, it's definitely possible to do this at O of n time rather than have it be quadratic. And is it fair? Is it all right if you jumped in that mindset?
Yeah, you can do that. But if they say, okay, great, write me the code, and you realize the complicated algorithm that you have in mind is going to be really hard to implement, you might think about that.
But as long as you can follow through, it's all good.
Yeah, yeah. No, you don't need to unnecessarily make things slow. It's just if it looks hard, don't get stuck trying to find absolutely the most ideal thing.
I had a question, sir.
Yeah.
This is like very like a little different than like the other questions, but I want to ask, since you already had like a career working in industry, I was wondering why you decided to get a PhD, what you decided to do it in, and if you felt like it was better that you worked in industry then went to get a PhD as opposed to doing PhD then starting working.
Good question. I'm happy to answer it, but maybe let's wait until the end. I want to
Sure.
make sure we have time for all the other things we have planned here. But yeah, I'm happy to answer that question later. Okay, so common mistakes that I've seen people make, only seeing one side of a trade-off, and keep in mind that in a lot of cases, there's no best solution, unlike in typical assignments, like in school. A lot of students particularly don't want to commit to an answer without all information, but in the real world, you're not going to have all the information. So just make a good, simple guess. And simple is the key here, right? So if I ask you how you might store a list of URLs and I don't tell you what you're going to do, maybe you just pick an array. Why an array? Well, it's simple. And then we can argue later about, oh, if it's for this, then okay, maybe I'll choose this other approach. Okay, I talked about premature optimization. Sometimes you miss the big picture, and you can ask yourself, why does the interviewer care? And again, if you can line up their questions with, you know, business needs, that shows how you're thinking at a higher level. And you know, if it seems like it's getting harder and harder, you know, just stop for a minute and like think about that. You can ask, is this supposed to keep getting harder? Or should I maybe back up here and try something else? Finally, be really careful to not be satisfied with your first answer. So, you know, this is sort of the opposite of premature optimization, right? So come up with a good, simple answer first. And then you can say, well, I'm not sure this is optimal. Do you want me to keep working on this? Or I think I can do better. Let me try to do better. And they might stop you. Oh yeah, you know, I see you can do better. You know, that's good enough for now. Or they may want to see you do it. But show that you're someone who seeks maybe not perfection exactly, but something really good. Okay. I want to jump into some practice to make sure we have some time for that. So I'd like to do some breakout rooms. Rachel, can you organize? Okay, I was just in a conversation with someone who asked a good question, so maybe I'll answer it for everybody and they can choose if they want to follow up or not. The question is basically, what's a good enough answer to the question, you know, why do you want this job? And my answer is that you don't have to show that, you know, your entire life you have dreamed of doing this. You just have to show that, you know, it aligns with your career goals. And that you are well suited in terms of your skills and experience to the kinds of things that job requires. You know, in some positions they're hoping for somebody who is going to work there for 20 years. In other positions, they acknowledge that, you know, this is a need we have right now, and we'll need you to do this for the next year. And then after that, we'll talk about, you know, the needs of the company and your career goals and how we can work that out together. So I don't know if that completely addresses the question, but then there's no like really pat answer to that question, but I wanted to answer something. Okay, I'm happy to stick around for a little while to answer questions. Does anybody have any revelations or interesting events that happened in their practice? Something you learned, something that was surprising?
Yeah, that second question is kind of crazy. The dive one.
Tell me more about that. What's crazy about it?
Oh, I mean, I read it and I don't know, like when my teammate Joshua was saying that they found like a Git page and it was gigantic explanation on something. I mean, I don't know. When I read the question, I guess I didn't initially think there was. I even realized it wasn't really an algorithms question at first, so I was very surprised. It was more architecture based.
Wait, you're talking about the stock prices question.
No, not that one. The one about the dive in.
Oh yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. The dive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think of that as kind of a systems question. To what extent do you understand how computer systems work? And nobody's going to understand everything about how computer systems work. So the question is, what do you particularly understand? And which sections of the stack are you comfortable with talking about? And which section of the stack are you not comfortable with talking about? And, you know, again, you're not going to be comfortable with all of it.
Would that second question be asked to us computer science students, even though we're like not computer engineering students at all? Like we don't really learn like the deep down things about the hardware and what's happening with, you know,
Oh
the
yeah,
computer.
yeah, absolutely. It's a perfectly valid software question. And you answer according to your the areas that you understand best, right? So you talk about the event loop, you talk about events, you talk about views and windows and how events are propagated to different event handlers and the code that you write to handle events. And, you know, when you press a key down, that's not just key down, it's also key up. So there's 2 events, not just one. There's a lot to talk about there from a software perspective. And the expectation is, yeah, you're not going to talk about, you know, the transistors underlying the key. That's, you know, under the abstraction for you, and that's fine. Other comments? What was surprising?
Was it asked already, the reason that you went into your PhD after industry?
Ah, okay, yeah, good question. Right, so one of the things I noticed when I was in industry is that nobody knows how to design good programming languages. I mean, we have a lot of languages, but then if you want to know, is this one better than that one, then it amounts to like some sort of argument that you have in the hallway. And, you know, people draw on their experience. I had a terrible experience with such and such. I'm never going to do that again. Or, you know, my friend over there is using this tool and they really like it, so let's give it a try. It just seemed to me that there should be some science behind it. We should actually be able to design languages in a way that lets us take users into account and then design on the evaluation of the language. And that kind of question is a long-term research question. It's not a short-term, let's build a product kind of question. So that's why I went back to academia to pursue a PhD.
My other question, I like asked about this earlier, but was, do you think like working in industry then doing a PhD provided you of any value other than like doing a PhD then going into industry, like as to give you insight as to what you're to like do your PhD in?
Yes, definitely. One of my criteria that I set for myself before going back to do a PhD is that I wanted to make sure I had some particular problem that was so interesting to me that I was going to be able to focus on it for 5 or 6 years. I didn't want to start a PhD and then get 3 years in and then decide I didn't care about it anymore. So, you know, the problem that I mentioned, you know, it bothered me for years and years when I was at Apple, and I decided, okay, it's finally time to go do something about this.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you tell us what that textbook, the hard textbook question you were asking your interviewees?
Oh, yeah, I guess I can tell you. It was well, okay. I'll tell you the question as I asked it. And then you can decide if you're going to look it up on a textbook or work on it. We only have a few minutes, so you're not gonna. Okay. Imagine you work in a factory. Well, there are some people who work in a factory who come to you with a problem. They need to assemble machines, and each machine has P parts. And if you install the parts in the wrong order, then the machine doesn't work. You have to install them in the correct order. So you're given a list of pairwise constraints, like part 1 goes before part 2, part 3 goes before part 4, that sort of thing. So you're given the number P and a list of these constraints. And the job is design an algorithm that either outputs some ordering of the parts that satisfies all of the constraints, or outputs error if no such order exists. So some of you might be thinking, oh yeah, I know that problem. I know where to look it up because it has a name. Others of you are probably thinking, I've never heard of that problem before. And either way, it's okay. The question is, can you have an interesting conversation about it? Could be that some of you just answered that problem yesterday for homework in your algorithms class. I don't know.
Can you more quantifiably define an interesting conversation?
Quantifiably, no. A conversation where you feel like you learn something, where you're excited to work with the other person, where you feel like they're going to bring value to your group. You have some shared knowledge. I don't want to say shared interests because I'm not talking about personal interests, like, I don't know, sports or whatever. I'm talking about like, hey, that's a really interesting technical problem. We could work on that for a while and try to figure out some solution to that problem. Or I agree, there's no good answer to this question that you brought up. Maybe we should build something. I don't know how to build it, but let's build something. It doesn't have to be as concrete as like, let's go build something tomorrow. If you think about a time when you just finished an exam and you go up to your friend who just took the same exam and you talk about the shared experience that you just had. And it wasn't a shared experience really in the sense that, I mean, you each took the exam separately, but you each had this experience and now you can kind of reminisce about what it was like in detail. Question 3, the thing with the thing, you remember, what did you do about, right? And like you have an impassioned conversation about question 3. And at the end, you're both satisfied that, like, maybe you each learned something about how to answer question 3 better. You each established the other kind of knows how to do that kind of problem. You can see how question 3 is interesting. That sort of conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes more sense.
You know, like you and the interviewer have some common ground because you're looking at this common area of interest, this job, right? The job in the area should be shared, well, or typically have some overlap, right? Otherwise, it's probably not a good job for you. The overlap might just be, we both want to build X, and I want to use code to build X, and you want to manage the people who are building X. Like, that's a perfectly fine overlap, but there's something that's shared there.
One question I also had was, are you going to return, like, or did you return back to Apple after finishing your PhD?
I haven't yet. I guess you never know. And it also depends on what Apple, you know, where Apple goes. I mean, my interest right now is in research. So if Apple were to, you know, sort of develop in that direction, then maybe Apple's a great place to be.
So for now, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. I was just
That's
going to say, for now, do you just plan to stay in like academia doing research? As
Yeah, that's
opposed
my plan.
Okay,
We'll see how it goes.
thank you.
The industry path is actually easier for a variety of reasons. For one, there are more positions open. Okay, we should maybe wrap up. I'm happy to take more questions if anybody wants to send me email. I wish you all good luck in your future interviews and your job search.
Where is your email?
You can find me at the CS, UMDCS webpage. If you search my name, you'll find my email.
Okay, thank you.
If you have trouble
Sure,
finding
welcome.
it, I have it. I know Emmanuel has my email.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael, for being here and for presenting. This was great. I mean, obviously I didn't sit in on the breakout rooms, but the presentation was wonderful. And based on the questions, I know that students got a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Good, you're welcome. If anybody has feedback from me, I do this occasionally, so I'm happy to, you know, revise according to feedback if any of you have comments that you want to send me.
Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
bye
you.
everyone.
Thank you.